Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. Now, if you have been following our show for a while, you will probably recognize our guest today. We have Jenny Boster. She is back to talk with us again about even more female composers and women composers. Now, you may know her. She is a wonderful pianist, a great teacher, a clinician, and she owns The Playful Piano. It's a website where she offers all sorts of teaching resources and ideas for piano teachers that teach all different levels of piano students. And she is also the curator of the annual Women Composers Challenge, where she introduces music lovers to all sorts of women composers and other composers that are really worth learning about, but don't get too much attention. And it has been a great success, and so much has happened over the last year with women composers and the exposure that they're getting and people being excited about it. And so I invited Jenny back to talk with us again about women composers and to introduce us to even more composers that we should be listening to. So thank you so much for being here, Jenny. Welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yes. And so you have had a very, very busy year. You've done all sorts of things with
Yes,
women composers and getting the word out. Tell us about some
yes.
of the things you've been up to.
So probably one of the biggest ones is I published another book about women composers that was based on last year's Female Composers Challenge. And it's a Shades of Sound coloring book. We talked about that on the last podcast. So it's a listening and coloring book, and it covers all 31 of the composers that we learned about last year during the challenge. So that was a really fun project to get that out there. I've done some conferences. I've exhibited at some conferences. I've presented about female composers, which is so fun. It's so fun to kind of share my excitement and try to get other people aware and excited about it too.
Yeah, what has been the reaction of people? Are people pretty excited about this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You can like feel the energy in the room. Some people are like, yeah, they just like, why don't we know about these women? Once you start listening to their music and start learning just how many of them there are and realizing I have never learned about any of these women before in all of my training, many of us through college music programs, it's fun to see people get kind of excited that there's all these new people to learn about.
And I have to say, you are just so ahead of the curve because we talked about this a year ago. And then all of a sudden, this March, which is, Women's
Hmm.
History Month, women composers were everywhere.
Yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
they're just having their like time in the sunshine. And
Yes.
I think I talked to you about this before, but I like to listen to different shows when I'm walking my dog. And I was listening to Performance Today, and they played this piece, and I was listening to it, and I thought, I know this. Where do I know this? I know this piece from somewhere. And they announced it, and oh my goodness, it was Summer Song from your Women's Composers Challenge
Yes.
from last year.
Yep.
And I was like, "Oh my goodness, look at this. This is fantastic."
That is
First of
awesome.
all,
You
I
recognized
recognized it
it.
outside of
Yeah.
context. Yeah, which is amazing. And then second, it was just awesome that it was like on this national platform, just
Yes.
playing it.
Yes.
It was just part of the programming.
I love that. I feel like there really is a lot of momentum happening. So even
Mhm.
since last year when we talked last, I think there's been at least 4 anthologies of piano works by women published that I know of.
Wow.
There's been a lot.
Wow.
Yes. So I'm amassing quite a collection, but that's really, really exciting because I think when we talked last, we talked about, where do you find their music? And it's like, I don't know, it's hard, but it's getting
Right.
easier even just after a year. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of books out there now with
Right.
women composers' piano works.
Yeah, I remember you saying that you went into a music store and they like had no
I had
idea.
nothing. They're like, what? What? Yeah, yeah. So it's really
Yeah.
exciting to see these books put out there, and I hope that they can get more into the mainstream, but it's up to the teachers to buy them and to know about them,
That's
to
true.
assign them to their students. But
That's true because there needs to be the demand or else they won't keep publishing.
yes, definitely. And there's a lot of people, like you said, if you go onto Instagram or just different social media, there's a lot of people kind of doing similar work. And
Mhm.
several that are new, at least to me in the last year, there's Piano Music She Wrote. which is
Yes.
fantastic. Um, Everybody should go follow them. They are cataloging all of the works, piano works by women on the IMSLP website. The Boulanger Initiative, there's Hensel Pushers, which is awesome. They're putting all of Fanny Hensel's music freely available, in PDF. There's a new site also called Her Classical, which focuses on women from the classical era. There's videos, there's information about their lives, and there's sheet music, which is
Oh,
awesome
wow.
because I feel like even just when we talked last year, it's like it's really hard to find nicely, engraved, actual published music other than the
Right.
handwritten
Hmm.
manuscripts that you could find. So it's really cool that there's a lot out there now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also, I think talking about just being out there, one of Florence Price's compositions, so two of them, won a Grammy this year.
Really?
Did you see that?
No.
Yes, it was the Philadelphia Orchestra. They had recorded Florence Price's Symphony number 1 and 3, and it won Best Orchestral Performance at the 2022 Grammys.
That is awesome. I had no idea.
Isn't that great?
That is great. That is really great. I love that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just feel like there's a lot of momentum, and I feel like I just did a quick, we talked about the symphony performances. I feel like the numbers are going up a little bit from the ones I had looked at. I know in Utah, um, let's see, I wrote down the number. I think this year it was 7% works by
Oh,
women, which
wow.
is still pretty low. But I mean, I think it's partly because Arlene Sierra, who was one of the composers we talked about this year, is the composer in residence, and they premiered a lot of her stuff. So that was partly why. But I looked last night, the New York Phil. I think they were about 18% of their works this year were by women, which is fantastic.
Wow.
So
Wow.
um, I feel like there's a lot of momentum happening, which is awesome.
Mhm. That is awesome. And I feel that a lot of piano competitions, especially, are focusing on underrepresented
Uh-huh.
composers
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Our alma mater, BYU, they
mhm.
just participated in one of
Yeah,
those
they
too.
did, they did.
And that's, yeah, and that's not just women composers, but also other composers from different countries or different races that are underrepresented.
Right.
There's really a push for diversity right
I
now.
love that. That is so great. And I was thinking about that, like, what's our ultimate goal? I think the ultimate goal is to teach them together seamlessly without having to qualify it, not to having to
Right.
qualify a woman composer or a female composer. It's kind of like when people say girl boss, like, can you just be a boss, like,
Yeah.
and I know some people have said, oh, why do we have to just call them female composers? Well, I think that's the goal, is to have them together, taught
Right.
together, where you don't have to do that. But they have been
Right.
so underrepresented and just erased from the narrative for so long. It's so important to do this work, to focus on them, to get them out there. But I feel like that's kind of the ultimate goal, is to teach
Mm.
them together. And I'm trying to
Yeah.
do that with my own students. Just recently, I thought I'm going to start doing a composer of the month, and I just teach them a little bit about the composer. We listen to some of their music, kind of just in little bits and pieces here in the lesson. And I was like, I'm
Hmm.
starting with a female composer, so we started with Amy Beach, and
Mm.
just just recently I was having them, okay, how many composers do you know? Let's time for 1 minute and see how many you can write down. And even the little ones, Amy Beach, that was the first one they knew. And I was like, yes, that's a lot. You don't
Oh.
have to say female composers. Like, let's just teach them to the rising
Right.
generation along with the men. It doesn't have to be 50-50. Just teach great music
Right.
by all composers. And I think that's kind of the goal. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I've actually had a lot of my students ask, they're like, is there any like women composers?
mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Of
yeah.
course. Let's like, here you go. Actually, one of them was because her hands were too small. She was playing something, I think a Tchaikovsky. She's like, my hands don't reach this. Are there
Yeah.
any women composers with small hands that actually wrote stuff? And I'm like, why, yes, there
Yeah, I
were.
love
Let's
that.
go listen to
And isn't it great that
some.
and that you have the resources to be able to do that?
Right. Like a year and a half ago, I
Yeah,
would have been like, sorry.
I have no idea. Yeah,
But,
exactly. I
but
sent
now,
out a survey about a year ago. I presented last fall, all about female composers, and so I sent out this survey to a bunch of teachers just to get some thoughts on it. And so many of them were like, I had no idea. Like, I had no idea. Like, there's just no awareness, even
yeah,
recently, that there are so many. So it's really exciting that we're
yeah.
getting more aware, and we're learning about that. So
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the Women Composers Challenge
yeah.
that you're curating. So just explain. I know we talked about it last year, but explain a little bit about your goals and why you put that
Okay.
together.
Well, really, the goal is awareness, like I was saying. I just
Mhm.
want to spread this awareness because once you're aware of it, you can't help but realize and
Right.
think, oh, where are the women and who should I be teaching and what should I be doing? So, um, during the month of March for Women's History Month, I highlighted one female composer each day. I put together a listening calendar, and then every day I just send out an email with some information about their life so you could get to know them a little bit, where they came from, kind of their life story a little bit. And then we just listened to their music, and we focused on totally different composers than we did last year. So it was fun
Yes.
to kind of curate this list. And I'm still like, well, I'm not really amazed because now I'm like, there are so many, but it's amazing how many I'm finding because I already have this huge
Yeah.
list for next year of really fantastic ones.
Do you really?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There's so many. Once you start kind of diving in and listening, like there's no going back. Like you just find so many. So it's been really fun.
Well, and I loved you had so many living composers this
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
So many new composers to listen to, and you kind of dived into film music because so many composers are doing both art music
yeah,
and film music, or both art music and theater music. They're so like multifaceted, some of these
yeah.
composers.
And I think that's another important point is that I feel like all of our training composers were white, male, and they were dead. you know, we didn't. I didn't. We didn't really. At least I don't think I played anything by a living composer either. So I think it's really great to show our students and just to learn that there are people, young people our age, younger. Our youngest this year was 16, who we focused on. There
Wow.
are people composing today, and I think that's really inspiring to students to have a role model. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I had a story. A good friend of mine, she and her daughter did the challenge last year, and have read some of my books and done the listening and coloring books. And she texted me one day with a screenshot of her computer. She opened up the computer, and it was a music notation program that was open, and her daughter was composing like a it was like a harp concerto or something. And she's saying how like she was saying, I want to be in one of Jenny's books someday. I want to be a female composer. I just love that
Wow.
the power of having a role model that looks like you is really big. It really is.
Yeah.
And as I've learned about these women, I get really excited when I can relate to them in some way. Um,
Yeah.
Little story, like so last year one of our women was Florence Price that we focused on
Right.
in the challenge, and in the fall I was working on my book and trying to get it done, and I actually had foot surgery. So I was just sitting there for a couple of weeks, nothing to do. So I focused on getting that book done. And so I'm sitting there and my foot is all bandaged up in a boot, and I was researching Florence Price, and I learned this cool story about her. She broke her foot, and while she was, just sitting around waiting for her foot to heal, that's when she composed her first symphony and her piano sonata, which both won like prizes that year in this big
Yeah.
competition. And that symphony was the first one to be by a black American woman to be performed by a big orchestra. So I thought that was so cool. And there was a quote where she said something like, if I don't know if I'll ever be so fortunate as to break my foot again because she got so much done. But I just had this cool moment with Florence as I'm sitting there with
Yeah.
my foot and just relating to her and to her story. And that's why it's so important. Music is a reflection of somebody's story, and it's a reflection of the
Yeah.
world that they live in. And so
Mm-hmm.
by only listening to the music by men, we're leaving out half the population's experience. And so context is really important, and just representation, because we learn so much from these women,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we can relate to them in some way with like an injured foot. So
The broken foot. Well, and I love that's one of the things I love about your challenge is that you do put their life stories in there.
yeah.
And some of these stories are just heartbreaking and like drama, and
Yes.
some of them are very nice. Henriette Bosmans,
Uh-huh.
you can't make that up what she
Exactly.
did.
During the war, she went through so much. She
Mm-hmm.
was Jewish. Anyway, it's fascinating to learn these stories.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So like a little bit of background about her. She was half Jewish,
Yeah.
and she wouldn't join the Nazi party, and they kidnapped her mom, and
Yeah.
she had to go in, this Jewish woman, she had to go in and convince them not, to let her mom go.
Yeah.
And she wasn't able to marry the man she loved.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I was like,
Oh yeah.
is your life for real? Like
I know. I know. Well, the other one I think of, which is one of them I wanted to share today, was Mel Bonis. Do you remember her
yes.
story?
Yeah,
So
yes.
I'll just tell a little bit about her. So Melanie Bonis is her name. She actually published
Mhm.
all of her music under the name Mel Bonis
Mhm.
to kind of disguise her gender. And it was
Mhm.
incredible that most of her music was published during her lifetime, which is amazing. She wrote
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
300 works, tons of piano works,
Mhm.
like gorgeous piano works. Like I don't even know
Yeah.
why I didn't know about her before now, just recently. But so she was
Yeah.
born in Paris. She lived during the Belle Epoque, the beautiful period where like
Mm.
they're constructing the Eiffel Tower and there's all this art and music and science and just like awakening happening. And she um she studied at the Paris Conservatory, same time as Debussy. So she was,
Mhm.
at school with all these great people. She fell in love with a classmate. They had
Mhm.
this romance, but her parents did not approve, so they pulled her out of school. And she ended up going into an arranged marriage at age 25 with a man who was like 50, I think. And
Oh, wow.
he was nice, like he was a nice guy. But he didn't like music, and so there's this like kind of juxtaposition of her. So she's in this like she's living this bourgeois housewife life and raising. He had
Yeah.
like 5 boys, and I think they had a few kids.
Mhm.
So she spent about a decade just raising all of these kids, just being this proper, perfect housewife. But really, she was this like incredible romantic composer, and
Yeah.
she ended up reuniting with this love interest from college, and I think he helped her actually meet her publisher, and
Oh, wow.
he kind of encouraged her, and she started composing again all this amazing music. But they had an affair, and then a secret child,
Oh my
a
goodness.
secret daughter who was raised by a foster family, who later ended up staying with Melanie and her family. Didn't know she was her mom, and the girl fell in love with her half brother. Like, you can't make this stuff up. um anyway, just crazy, 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 fascinating life. But she was an amazing composer. She was
Her
very
music's gorgeous.
renowned during her lifetime, and she
Yeah.
wrote a lot of amazing piano work. So she was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. And she was one, I think I have seen some old sheet music of Mel
Uh-huh.
Bonis, I think, but I never realized
Yeah.
that she was a woman.
Oh yeah, exactly, exactly. And I'm excited to kind of dive in more and try out some of her music and to learn more,
It's
because
gorgeous.
it is gorgeous. It's
Hmm.
beautiful. And she wrote so much of it for piano. She wrote concert works as well as easier kind of pedagogical works as well. So that's really
Mm.
cool from a teacher standpoint, because there's going to be music you can assign to your students at a younger stage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that is one thing. It's nice to have some of those easier works to introduce, because so
yes,
many works are, well, a lot of these composers were, performers
yeah,
themselves, and so they wrote things that they could perform, and so some of them are a little bit too technical and too difficult for some
hmm,
students, but it's nice to
yeah.
see the ones that did some easier music as well.
Definitely. And since you brought that up, some of these anthologies that have come out are leveled. So the piano
Oh.
music she wrote, ladies have put out 2 volumes so far, and they start out really easy. And a few of them they've arranged to be more
Oh.
accessible, but most, there's a lot that are really accessible for the younger stages. And I think they have a third book coming out. And then there's another anthology by One Eye Publications, and it's the same
Mhm.
story. They're leveled, so you can start out with easier ones for the younger students, which is awesome.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the story that kind of spoke to you the most this year? I mean, you had Florence
So
Price last year, but what about
yeah,
this year?
you know what? Okay, this was kind of weird. The one that spoke to me, her music did not initially speak to me the most, but when I learned her
Okay.
story, like I loved her so much. Ruth Crawford Seeger. So she
Hmm.
was her music. So I first listened to some of her music. It's ultra modern. It's like super dissonant. So it's not
Hmm.
like which is I feel like is an acquired musical taste. And I was like, okay, whatever. But I kind of kept her on the back burner. But I started reading about her, and she's so fascinating. And I just feel like I just was inspired by her. So um, she was composing like the 1920s and 30s, and she was a really important 20th century composer. She was one of the most prominent female 20th century composers in America. She went and studied with actually her future husband before they met because he was her teacher, her composition
Hmm.
teacher, Charles Seeger. Um, but so she was a pianist and a composer. So in the 1920s and 30s, she was composing really like ultra modern dissonant music. But she loved Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Bartok, and she was apparently just a phenomenal piano teacher. She used a lot of improvisation in her teaching. There was a story about a boy who came to her and he loved jazz. He was really good at jazz, but I think his parents wanted him to learn classical. And so she had this way of just like meeting her students where they were. And she said, "Oh, that is so neat. Can you teach me how to do that?" So they started kind of improvising together.
Oh,
And then she said, "Well, what if we put this Bach melody with this?" And so she started adding in like a Bach melody, and he just loved it, and kind of some more classical chord progressions, and he just like ate it all up. He loved it. And she just had this
wow.
way of connecting with her students, and she just sounded like a phenomenal piano teacher. She was like an amazing mom. She loved kids. I think her husband had 3 kids that were her stepchildren, and she had 4 more. And she said she would have had more if she could. She was just this devoted mother. She was always singing with her children and just like talk. And I was reading this an interview with her kids and her husband where they talked about her and how just seamlessly music, kind of wove into their family life. And many of her kids ended up being folk singers.
Oh,
And then
wow.
she also, I loved this about her. She kind of got into preschool music instruction, like
Hmm.
really young, because she was in charge of her daughter's nursery school one day. So she's like, well, what am I going to do? So she had them lined up in a train and had them singing and all of this stuff. And I've taught so many preschool music classes. We did the same thing. We did trains and we did, little instruments. So I just loved that. I could really connect with that.
Hmm.
And she presented on early music education to like hundreds of teachers. So she had,
Wow.
and then she kind of like went off from the ultra modern composing later and became a folk song curator at the Library of Congress. So then she was curating and transcribing American folk songs. So she had this like just multifaceted career. Um, but just learning about her life, I just thought she was so inspiring, and it made
Yeah.
me like her music more. So I thought that was really neat, and so important
Isn't
to
that
learn their
interesting?
story.
Isn't that interesting that you can connect with the composer and it makes you enjoy their music more?
Yeah, yeah, it is interesting because now
Yeah.
I hear it and I think like, oh, she was amazing. She was this amazing pianist, and just thinking about her whole life story, it definitely adds context to the music, and it's yeah, definitely more enjoyable. So that was a really cool one this year for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Where did you find all of these composers? How did you find them?
um so I listen a lot. I have an Apple Music subscription, and I listen a lot. And anytime if I'm scrolling through something and I see I'm on some women composer groups on Facebook, or just if I
Mhm.
ever see something, I screenshot. I have like this whole album of screenshots in my phone. And then I just look them up on Apple Music, and I just have tons of playlists like for
Yeah.
future things, and it's so fun. There's so many people out there. There's so many composers that are so exciting. So I just listen a lot. And then when I find somebody that I'm like, oh, I really like their music, then I kind of dive in and try to learn about them. And
Yeah. Well, and you were so helpful at the end of this challenge. You had 9 steps to raise awareness
mhm,
that you sent out for all of us so that we can find
yeah,
even more and we can take the whole goal was that this challenge was to just be a jumping off point. Do you want to talk a little bit about
yeah,
the 9 steps that you laid out?
yeah, definitely. So, and this was geared towards piano teachers specifically because I really feel
Hmm.
like we're the ones who are going to change the story. Like we really are. You know, when I have
Yeah.
my little student and she says Amy Beach and she's so excited about it, like, okay, like we're the ones who can do it. It's not,
Yeah.
you know, it's going to be a slow process as our students learn and grow. But so the first thing is just to search out their names. Just try to find them. You know, you can find lists of, you know, you can find lists of them. And I gave out a list of, you know, composers you should know at the end of the
Yeah.
challenge as well. But just start looking and trying to find their names. And then, of course, listen to their music, which is what I do. I just listen all the time. And it's so great these days because you can stream music. Music is
Yeah.
at the tip of our fingertips. I remember when I was a
Right.
teenager learning music, and my dad had to take me to the bookstores to, you know, Barnes and Noble, to their CD section to find a recording of
Yeah.
my concerto I was learning. You know, we were so
Right.
blessed to have all of this music just at our fingertips. Just listen,
Yeah.
like listen to their music. But then I think it's important to go a step further and play their music. Start playing it. Start sight reading it. And because then you get to know what is going to work for your students, and you know what they're going to love, and it's just so much fun to play it. And then of course it's so important, like we talked about with Ruth, Crawford, Seeger, learn about their lives. That's when
Right.
the music really comes to life, and
Yeah.
it gives it context, and it really makes it more meaningful. The next one was to support local performances by women, because they're not going to put them on if people don't support them. So if there's a performance with female composers, you know, try to go to it. That's really important. Also, buying music that's published music by female composers, and like we talked about, it's getting easier to find. I would love for the next step to be an anthology that includes women's music and men's music together. That's you know, the future
Yeah.
goal. But you know, it's great that there's so much available now, way more than last year, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And then
Amazing.
start teaching it to your students. You know,
Yeah.
there's you can find easier music by women for your younger ones. There's so much available. You know, I encourage people to get some of these anthologies and start playing through them and start assigning them to your students. And then including female composers when you teach music history or listening, whatever you do in your studio, which I think is really important to always be doing something with music history and listening. Just start getting them listening to it, getting them to know about it. With my students, you know, they had a lot of fun. I try to teach them things about the composer that they could relate to. So with Amy Beach,
Yeah.
I taught them how when she wrote her first piece at age 4, and they're always like, what? You know, and she composed it away from the piano in her head. She was at her
Oh.
grandpa's farm for the summer, and she composed it in her head, and she got home and said, Mom, and she sat down and played it. And then I have a copy
Wow.
of it, so I would play it for my students, and they're just like amazed, you know. So there's little ways
Yeah.
you can put it in, you know, teach them the history that they can connect with. And then the last one is just, as you know, go to your local music store, like we talked about, and ask them what they have and see if they can maybe order some of these books and, you know, buy from your local music store, but let them know that we're interested in piano works by women.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also like the idea of searching out living composers and going and seeing their concerts, and not just streaming, but maybe buying their albums or finding a way that you can
Support
directly
them.
support
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
definitely.
So that
Definitely.
so you have these 9 things and you're wanting everyone to do this. And I was just kind of thinking about how much easier it is now to find things. Um, and I was thinking about when I was in college, I remember my teacher did ask us, I want you to find something and I want you to play something by a living composer. And I didn't even know like where to start.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and so social media has really, really helped. I'm like, what do I do? Do I go look at like magazines? Do I
Mm-hmm.
but now with social media, not only can you learn about these composers, but if they're living, you can find them. You can ask them questions, you know,
Yeah.
you can see
Follow them on
like what
social media. You
you
can
can
message
follow them.
them.
Yeah. I know. It's
Which
amazing
I've
that you can
done.
actually
I've
message
been
them.
messaging some of them that we've learned about, and it's so great. It's awesome.
Yeah. And their reaction has been really good. I've seen
Yeah.
how they're like, "Oh my goodness," you know,
Yeah.
and they're so excited that people are listening to their music. And if you go and you find them and you support them, like perform their works. You talk to them, see, hey, is there something, for us adults, if there's something new, maybe we can perform some new work. Maybe we could,
Yeah.
premiere something that's brand new. You never know. But
Mm-hmm.
if you like create a relationship between some of these living performers and living composers, I think not only does that help with the women narrative and the female composers narrative, but I think it helps with classical music just in general.
Oh yeah.
And it keeps it in more of like the mainstream
Yeah,
consciousness.
definitely. It makes it more relevant. There's so
Yes.
many fantastic living composers that I think can help get young people interested in classical music today, because
Right.
it's so their music is awesome. It's really great. And I think of
Yeah.
Sarah Kirkland Snider. I've been listening to her Mass for the Endangered like on a loop. It's so gorgeous. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of a modern take on the Catholic Mass, but it has poetry mixed in about the planet and about animals and you know
Yeah.
the natural world. It's gorgeous. So it's a cool way.
Right.
And a lot of composers are doing that, kind of using their platform to share something that they're advocating for, and that means something to them, and that can help bring people in to enjoy music as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think because music really is about human connection. And when there is a living human out there composing, then
Yeah,
you realize, I get so tired of people telling me that classical music is dead
yeah,
and there's no more. And I'm like, no, that's not true. There's so much out there, and there's so many different styles of classical music now. There's so many different types of composers out there. There's something out there for everybody.
definitely.
And I just applaud you for bringing so much awareness to female composers and to like lesser known composers, or maybe composers that are young and
Yeah,
starting out.
yeah.
It's a wonderful thing to do.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful
I think it's important,
Yeah.
and it's exciting. Once you kind of start, you get really passionate about it, and so it kind of fuels you to keep going.
Yeah. So, what's next for you? What are you going to do now? Are you going to make
Well,
another
I
book
I
out of
probably
this
will.
year's?
I probably will eventually. um,
It's a big
it
job.
is a big job. It is a big job. It's so fun, but yeah. So I probably will make a book, about these ones eventually. I have like a half finished Shades of Sound curriculum that goes through the musical periods, and I think I told you about it last year. I was working on it
Yeah.
pretty hard last year, and then I got busy with some other stuff, and I've kind of put it to the side. But I pulled it out the other day, and like I need to work on this, because I think that's the goal, is to have a history curriculum or books that just teach them together seamlessly. So I'm going through each of
Yes.
the different periods, Baroque, classical, and presenting both, presenting the famous male ones
Awesome.
along with female ones. I think that's going to be really important to have that.
But I love it that you're putting them together because, like we said, a lot of these composers that you have talked about from history were very important in the music
Yes,
scene while they were alive. And
definitely,
it's just over the years they've kind of been erased from the narrative.
definitely.
And so by you putting them back in, it's actually a more accurate
It is, and I'm glad you brought
telling
that up.
of
I think
history.
that's so important to know that there was tons of women composing through every era of music,
Yeah.
and B, like their music is incredible. And just like the men, some will be more incredible than others, but I've
Right.
had comments of people that say, every piece I've listened to by women is it's just not very good, and I had somebody actually say that to me in a comment, and it's just the
Really?
harmonies are off, and so that I was like, no, that is so not true, and that fueled me to
Hmm.
put together this list of recommended pieces by women, and I sent that out as
Hmm.
part of the thing too, because I'm like, there are so many gorgeous works by women,
Yeah.
and it's true, there are so many. Once you start discovering them, you see that, oh yeah,
Hmm.
so these are just as beautiful as the works that we have grown up listening to, and it's important that we start to hear them as well.
Yes. Yeah. And you just need to we've kind of been taught that since we were little, not implicitly, but kind of in the background that the men's were, that was the real
Yep.
masterpieces. And,
Oh yeah.
you know, and you just kind of have to realize that's what's there, and you need to listen to the music for what it is.
Yeah.
And you realize that there are some that are not as profound as others, but there are plenty of profound and
Oh definitely.
forward thinking
Yeah.
and just kind of pushing the boundaries sort of compositions by women as there are of men. And we just kind of have to put preconceived notions behind us for a little bit.
Yep, definitely. And just listen. Just start listening. That's where it gets me. Like, if you just start listening, there's so much music out there that's incredible that we have never heard, and it needs to be heard. I
Yeah.
think it deserves to be heard. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for coming and talking with me. Do you have any last minute bits of advice for people wanting to know where to start?
you know what? Honestly, just start listening, start playing. There is so much out there. Go to imslp.org. In fact, go to Piano Music She Wrote. I'm doing a plug for them.
Yeah.
They're amazing. They have cataloged all the piano works by women, and they're putting out videos every week. That's a good place to start to get some names, and to get some music that you can sit down and play. But look for some of these anthologies. We've got Piano Music She Wrote. We've got Melanie Spanswick has just put out a new anthology that I just got the first one, and it's awesome. One Eye Publication is great. They have a 3-volume. Those are really great because you can start putting them into use in your studio and assigning them to your students. So yeah, just start diving in.
All right, and I'm going to put a plug in for you. Also, the Playful Piano and these Shades of Sound is the best place to start, honestly, because
Thank you.
because you have these curated lists of what to listen to,
Yes.
because sometimes it's hard just to know, but you have that list and you have the YouTube playlist that you can just easily go and find. And then you have these gorgeous illustrations
Thank
that
you.
has the tactile that you can color along and really express yourselves physically as well as listening. So I'll go ahead and plug that
Thank
for
you.
you
And you
because
know
you're
what?
much
And
too modest.
it's really good. It's great for all ages, really. So if you're a teacher or just a music lover wanting to know, get the coloring book. It's fun for all ages, honestly. I enjoy coloring them, but it's also great for your students as well. So it is a good place to start.
Yes, that's where I would start.
Thank you.
So, Jenny Boster, thank you so much for coming and bringing the expertise. I can't wait to see what happens this next year with women composers and with you and with Shades of Sound and all of these things. It's such an exciting time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.